Hey, what is up? Redless here. Today I'm going to be going through a few different sets for Gen 3 OU. Um, these are sets that are not forbidden knowledge. These are public sets that exist in team dumps, and they exist in a lot of games. But if you're a new player, you may not realize that these sets are standard because they are not on the Smog Dex analysis. Now, when I was a new player and I was getting started about 2 years ago, I wanted to build a lot of teams, but the teams that I built, I didn't. I had trouble with them because I would get started with, say, a Pokemon like Hariyama. Now, Hariyama's Smog Dex spread makes no sense. It's completely out of its mind. Um, and so I would be stymied, not just in terms of how to build on around Hariyama, but in terms of like just how to EV the Yama and what moves to put on it and everything, because the Smog Dex, which I used so reliably for most Pokemon, was just terrible for a lot of Pokemon. So this video, I'm going to be going over some spreads that I consider staples um, and common, but that are not on Smog Dex. Okay, so let's start with Doug Trio. So this is the standard beat up Doug Trio. The important benchmark that you should be thinking in terms of for bulk for this Doug Trio is it should be able to live a modest Blissey Ice Beam after one layer of spikes. 8176 is a spread that lets you do that. Now, there are other spreads you can run where you run a bit more HP and a bit less special defense. They hit the same benchmark in terms of beating Blissey, but they're a bit physically bulkier because they have more HP. Is that something that's valuable to you? You'd have to decide. Similarly, you could divert more points to speed or more points to attack, but the 8176 beats Modest Blissey after a spike benchmark is the important benchmark to go with, and this is a minimal basic spread that will let you do that. Um, okay, that's Doug Trio. So now let's talk about defensive Starmie. So the defensive Starmie stat on Smogon is, let's see, I believe it is this set or something. This is a nonsense set. The reason that they creep to 352 speed is to beat offensive, right, not defensive, offensive Gengar by outspeeding it. Now, frustratingly, you still kind of get smoked by offensive Gengar because it hits you very hard because you have no bulk and Speed F. Instead, and by the way, most Gengar in 2024 is not offensive. If you're a serious player, I would say 90% of your Gengar are defensive for most players who are serious. Instead, why don't you try one of these benchmarks? So the 330 benchmark beats things like Charizard and other base 100 um, plus speed guys, which Starmie checks Charizard. That's one of the things it does defensively. And 308 lets you beat Moltres, which is nice. If you want to go a bit slower, you could also creep down to like 300 to just beat Salamence. And you can even drop the plus speed nature and go to like 280 or something to beat like Modest Moltres or something. I don't know. Um, the default spread I would think about is this for Spadef Starmie. Now you still have the 40 points in special attack. You could also drop those out if you wanted more special defense, but those will let you beat bulk invested, aka Pursuit, Tyranitar, guaranteed with no spikes up with lefties with two surfs, which is an important benchmark. But even without these EVs, it's a roll. So you could easily drop them and put more points in SpidF, which will let you check that Pursuit Tyranitar and check things like Gengar that you're trying to spin versus more consistently. Um, that's very good, yeah, because Starmie's taking a lot of special hits, which is why I prefer the special set for Charizard, as I mentioned, Tyranitar, Special Tyranitar, and Mixments and other fires and things like that, Gengar. But if you want to, you could also put points into physical defense. How would that look? Well, if you're physically defensive, then you're basically checking like Metagross, for example. You're checking Swampert, which you now you need to have bulk to take earthquakes, but you resist its other moves. And you're checking um, threats of that nature. Maybe a bulky Tyranitar can no longer kill you. Claydol maybe gets walled, although you don't really need to check that because it's not doing anything normally. These things, as you may have noticed, tend to be slower. So if you run a physically defensive set, you can maybe just creep to 280 or creep, even less, 270, I don't know, for the men's 280, and then throw the rest in defense. And if you do this, you can run bold as your nature because you don't need the timid to reach the benchmarks that you're going for. You could also do timid and get to 292 and toss the rest in defense. But generally, yeah, those are how I would think about EVing your defensive Starmie. Um, I'll just show what I think the default baselines should be here. This, and then for the bold me, and by the way, I use the physically defensive much less. Maybe it's 20% usage or something compared to the especially defensive's 80% usage. But just so you know, it's there. Um, Something like this maybe would be appropriate. Bold. Okay, okay. That is defensive Starmie. Surprisingly powerful Pokemon. Now let's move on to Jirachi. So the best defensive Jirachi is the bold variant. The reason is this thing can shut down choice band attackers very effectively with Protect, and it's a rock resist, and now it's defensive, so it can also just take hits. It can also wall random stuff like Metagross or Swampert, some of the same stuff that the Starmie that I just mentioned walls. And it does this because of its powerful, bold nature and the fact that it has Protect to aid in its healing looping process. Now, let me talk a bit about the default Smogon set. It is um, this set, defensive. It has substantial specially defensive investment, and it's sassy. So it's slow, but it has body slam. I think this set is very bad. I almost never use it. I don't think it is good at doing what you want your defensive Jirachis to do. You could use it. Um, some people do use it, but my default go-to Jirachi is a physical wall, and it is bold, and it has Toxic and Fire Punch. This is the default spread, yes, that I would use. Um, Beating Arrow is the thing, is this thing's bread and butter. The other stuff is a nice cherry. Okay, now let's move on to Yama, the Pokemon that started it all. The reason I'm making this video. I looked at a lot of Yama spreads from publicly available dumps like McMegan's, from teams that people have sent me that are not publicly available, and just from my own experimentation, and I concluded that for some reason, all the good Yama spreads invest in exactly three attacks, which are attack, defense, and speed. The speed, obviously, you want because Yama is just a titch slower than uninvested Tyranitar and Blissey, which are the two things that it is checking. Obviously, would like to be faster than them so it can check them. Um, and the attack, of course, it hits physically, so you want the attack. Now, why the defense and not the HP or special defense? Now, it turns out that your physical bulk is roughly, approximately in Pokemon, a product of your HP stats and your defense stat. So in this case, 429 times 219. This is an approximation, but because um, the opponent's moves are essentially divided by your defense stat, and then divided again by your HP stat and multiplied by 100 to get a percentage. With a higher HP stat, you get more mileage out of investing in the defenses. Similarly, this is the same reason Blissey doesn't invest in HP. Similarly, with a very low HP stat, like if you're running like a Dusclops, you always want to max the HP because a marginal point on a defense stat that is already massive is worth very little, but a marginal point on a defense stat that is not worth very much is quite large. Think of it like a rectangle with one long side and a short side. If you're trying to increase the area, you do better increasing the short side. Okay, so why defense and not special defense? Um, Now, as I said, the main two things that Yama is checking are Blissey and Tyranitar. And it actually handily checks the special variants of Tyranitar on its own, because Tyranitar has 95 base special attack, and it does not have a psychic move to hit Yama with. So Yama can kind of just switch into Fire Blasts and Ice Beams and things all day. By the way, you always run Guts, you never run Thick Fat, even though I just mentioned those two moves. Um, and conversely, when Yama switches into like a BKC Tar Earthquake, it has trouble with that. Takes a lot of damage and it's annoying. And a lot of Yama's checks, by the way, such as Skarmory, which you often knock Skarm and then Yama gets to chip it as it spikes, also hit physically, and they aren't going to toxic you because it has guts. So you want to be able to take Drill Pecks a bit more confidently too. Um, but yes, so all the points on Yama's defenses I put into defense, and here it's just maxed because that's a nice round number. You could creep the speed to whatever you want. This is what I would run as a default. Okay, now let's talk about Gengar. So the default Gengar spread that you have on Smog decks is this kind of janky, weird spread. I believe it has like it has a, I'll just pull it up. It's extremely physically bulky. And the reason for that is someone figured out that if you run 248 HP and 44 defense on Gengar and you run Ice Punch, you can now check +1 Dragon Dance Salamence with this set. So you can use this to eat the Ice Punch, and you can use it to or to eat the HP flag and then force the Mence to eat an Ice Punch. Although the Menses now eat Ice Punch for some reason, so. But anyways, this is the default spread. I don't like it. I don't think it is toothy enough with its special attack. I think it's slow. If you've ever been outsped by a Charizard, you know how annoying it is that this Gengar loses that. And yeah, I do not like it. I prefer this spread. This is the default that you'll see from top people, I think, nowadays. Let me explain what all these EVs do. So the 330 speed benchmark, we already talked about this. The speed's positive nature base 100s, very important for like landing a Wish or Calm Minder, checking Zard, as I mentioned, and generally trading better into Zapdos than you could otherwise. Um, Now, the HP and SpDef might seem a bit arbitrary. Why those stats? Well, with this spread and this spread exactly, you eat two very important hits. The first hit you eat is Tyranitar Crunch, right? This is modest max Tyranitar Crunch. You eat it in sand. You don't die to it. You just kill the Tyranitar. Or you live the hit and then you can hit the Tyranitar more. Well, you don't kill it necessarily, but you could. You always live the hit. And the other hit that you eat is Aerodactyl Rock Slide. You also eat it in sand, and you are just on the edge of eating both of these moves with exactly this spread at 330 speed. Um, so because it has all these traits, people like this defensive spread that also has some speed investment. You still hit pretty hard with the special attack. If you wanted to, uh, if you chose, you could drop some points out of speed, go down to maybe 308 or even lower to the high 200s, and put more points into special attack and make it modest. And if you do this, it hits harder, it's a bit slower, but you get some interesting Claydol rolls, especially if you run Giga Drain. So this is a Gar spread you should be thinking about. Do not run the default moves on Gar. By default, toss random moves on there and fine tune it as you're testing the team. Um, because Gar has should with the same EVs it should have the highest moveset variability of any Pokemon, I think. Okay, so now let's talk about Zapdos. So the default Zapdos that you have on Smog decks is the good old Baton Pass Timid 328 Zapdos. Now, why is 328 bad for Zapdos? So let's look at the stuff that tends to be at 328. This is the base 100 gang. You have things like, of course, our friend Mixments. You have the Pixies, Celebi and Jirachi. You have Charizard, and you have enemy Zapdos. And these are probably the 5 things that are at base 100 that might invest in speed that you should think about. Um, Now, Zapdos will more or less always-ish lose to the Pixies and always-ish beat the Dragons. Um, it's probably not going to be switching into any of those. Um, and so it's not important. It's not that important for an offensive Zapdos to hit that 328 benchmark. Um, it's simply not valuable given the other things at that benchmark. You aren't getting that much better matchups against them, and those matchups aren't that important to you either. So to default with Zapdos, I recommend this spread. You're down at 280 speed, meaning you beat you beat Modest Moltres, and you beat a lot of other things like mm, Dragon Dance Salamence and things spread to beat Dragon Dance Salamence, and you beat like fighting types like Adamant Heracross, these types of things. Okay, 176 will do this for you. Um, but the important key feature of, and you have a bit more bulks to live the aforementioned Charizard and Salamence hits, um, random Metagross hits. These are, bulk is more important on Zapdos than you might think. Certainly more important than speed. And most importantly, though, this is the centerpiece, is this 252 plus special attack hitting 382. You can have a roll to one hit KO fully invested Skarmory in one hit with this much special attack, which is incredible. Um, I think it's 383 if you are running the other hidden power. But you're about 75%, if I recall correctly. And this is extremely important because hyper offenses will often, if they're leading Skarmory, which they kind of have to because otherwise they're very bad into Metagross lead, hyper offenses will often um, be forced to stay in turn one on your Zapdos and Spike, and they hope that your Zapdos will like, I don't know, baton pass out or hit you with a weaker Thunderbolt that they can then spike on. With 382 or 383, you get a roll to just kill them, which could win you the game on the spot against those hyper offenses, and it's certainly incredible in other situations versus Skarmory. And of course, it hits things like Metagross harder too, Suicune. Um, Special attack is great on Zapdos. I would say this is the default. You could also run. I don't endorse these moves, by the way, necessarily. You could also run a spread that goes a bit more into the defenses, maybe something that maxes HP out or is one below max, depending on what you're feeling. And you put the rest of the points into special attack. You still have that modest nature because the high base means that modest is worth a lot, even if you don't invest very much. And you could creep the speed to whatever you want. This is an alternative Zapdos spread that I also consider a staple. I usually like this better for its ability to manhandle the aforementioned Skarmory, but that could work as well. Okay, so the default Charizard spread. Let me talk to you about this default Charizard spread that you find in Smogon. It's Rash, and it's like 240 special attack. They put some points into attack, which I don't think is that important. The important thing to understand about Charizard is that you always run, always, usually, by default, you should be running timid, or I guess in this case, hasty, question mark, naive, max speed. The reason is those pixies that I talked about, Celebi and Jirachi, Charizard smokes them, but it can't smoke them if it's outsped by them because it's really frail and it dies to them if it's outsped by them. Similarly, Zapdos and Salamence, the other important base 100 Pokemon, are some of Charizard's answers. Charizard, if it hits them one additional time, that's one less time they can switch into it. And especially if you consider Blaze, Zapdos is probably on one or two switch-ins with this much speed, and Salamence similarly is maybe on two or three switch-ins with this speed without dying. So this speed is incredibly important for reducing the number of switch-ins that those things that check it, but it needs to be fast to beat them, can to limit that amount of switch-ins, as well as beat the Pixies. You always want to run 328 Charizard. This should be your default Charizard instead of the Smogdex spread. Okay, this is not a default spread. This is sort of a niche spread. Um, I don't use this that much, but I get past teams with it, and the grapevine tells me it's good. If you remember that Gengar spread we talked about earlier, well, it doesn't have very much special attack investment. I'm talking about the Smogdex spread. And if you run this much Spadef, you can actually eat Ice Punches from that Gengar. I know, insane. And You can get decent rolls versus Blissey Ice Beam, especially Bold Blissey, with his Spadef, allowing you to live those moves. Sometimes you live Starmie Ice Beam, by the way, which is wild. Um, but with this spread, you still hit the important beat arrow after a DD benchmark for speed, and you have that extra special defense that lets you sort of clown on things. I would not run this as your default, as I said. Where would I run this? If you're running a physical offense that just has no way to overwhelm and hurt Blissey and force Blissey in and force Blissey to take hits, um, then you're often in the position where you trade your pieces down and you have this Mence left, but they have a Blissey left, and Blissey checks DD Mence, unfortunately. Um, in those situations, if you have this spread, and I guess if you have Brick Break too, that would be even more important. You can now take advantage of those Blissies in a way that you couldn't with a more normal HP invested spread. So that's where I would run this. But yeah, you should know about this, but I never use it. Okay, Swampert. Uh, the off-pert spread is this on Smog decks is this weird, strange, twisted rash 192 speed. This is to outspeed Claydol or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird. The default spread I go with is something like this. I got this from Fudazi, I think. You could also just pull everything down to 0 and give it like, a little bit of speed or nothing. Um, there's different ways you could do it, and depending on how you do it, uh, you get different results, but they're not that different. But they are all way, way bulkier than this weird rash spread. They can actually take special hits. They can, they still do things offensively, which the rash spread has no problems with. But they can take hits from stuff like Arrow, DD Mence, most HP grasses, just way, way, way more confidently. Which is very important, of course, for a defensive Pokemon like Swampert. It's way more important than outspeeding Claydol going to 193. Why? It's Why would they care about that benchmark? I don't understand. Um, but yeah, I would look to something extremely boring like this for Swampert, or the spread I posted earlier, which will be in the paste with the video. Cloyster. The default Cloyster spread used to be a lot worse, I think. Now it's a bit better. The important thing for Cloyster to understand is its low SPDF means you should invest a lot in SPDF because it needs to be taking hits as the set spikes up. Um, so I put a lot of points in SPDF and HP to bulk it out on that side. So it can switch into waters, which is what it's supposed to be doing. You do not want to get 2 KO'd by an off-Kun Hydro as Cloyster. So this sort of spread is one I like. Oh, and here's the 192. You could do this however you wanted. You could creep to 244. You could do whatever. The important takeaway is lots of HP and SPDF. Treat it like a Skarmory, so that you can spike on those waters. That's what Cloyster does. Claydol. This is not the default Claydol spread, nor should it be the one that you go to without thinking about it, but this is a very fast Claydol spread that I think has a niche. Maybe I use 30% of my Claydol usage, or 20 is this. If you creep to 244, it is now a more confident Tyranitar check. If you don't know, 243 speed is the crucial benchmark for Tyranitar because that's where a max Jolly Tyranitar sits. So with this casual 232 investment, you can creep above it and hit it with a stab earthquake before it can get the drop on you. You can also boom. A lot of other stuff creeps to 244, such as like, I don't know, Suicune or Celebi or something. Um, or they creep below that. They creep to like 220. A Claydol like this will smoke those with boom before they can act, which is extremely important and extremely useful. In return, you have a little bit less HP, which sucks because you need this as a Calm Minder check or something. You're not outspeeding those with 244. Um, but on a defensive team where Claydol is just switching in, spinning, booming, maybe checking that tar with Earthquake, a spread like this is very, very welcome. Okay, bonus round. I'll talk about the Reggies. This is not a creative set, if you can see. I believe this is the same set I used for the Swampert that wasn't creative. Um, but the reason I'm mentioning this is because the default Regice spread is this demeaning 104 attack Regice. This gets like a roll on Snorlax with Dugtrio in the back, which is useful. It's great, but is this what you want your default spread with Regice to be on a normal team for you with Regice? And the answer is no. It's definitely not. You want a more boring spread that is more consistent and more powerful and plays to Regice's strengths rather than teching for one matchup. You could do that in Tour. But this is what I default to with Regice. Very boring. Okay, I won't talk about it anymore. This is my default Regirock spread. You run this with Counter and Explosion. Um, I invented this spread, so I get the credit. With 216 HP, you eat uh, Choice Banded Metagross Meteor Mash, if you can believe that. You eat it 100% of the time. So you lead with this, and if they mash you, you counter them, and you lose your Regirock. Well, whatever, who cares? And get to switch something in on the thing that killed your Regirock, which is very important and very useful to be able to get the drop on Choice Band Metagross that early in the game and that powerfully. This is a good spread for that. Now, let's talk about the Spadef, because that's the other elephant in the room. This lives all Suicune Hydro Pump with this much Spadef investment and this much HP. Meaning, if they lead a Suicune, it's like an off Coon. I mean, they think they win the lead matchup, right? So they probably either Hydro uh, to check like a Zap or a Snorlax coming in, who knows? Or they unfortunately Calm Mind. If you click Boom, you just kill them, and so it can be very valuable uh, for teams that struggle with Suicune and Metagross to have this Regirock that can sort of put those leads on the back foot from lead itself. Yes, very nice little spread there to do that. Okay, Registeel. So this is a spread. I have no idea why it was chosen. I know that's not the explanation I should be saying in a video, but that's the truth. And this was invented by the linear curve. I use this as my default on all my specially defensive Registeels. For the physically defensive, I just run max defense Impish. Um, although I feel a bit uncultured doing that. Yeah, this set here is Explosion, Seismic Toss, Thunder Wave, and then the last is either Counter or Protect. Um, this Registeel beats all Zapdoses, it beats Starmies. It acts like a Blissey essentially, but without a healing move. And it's a Rock Resist. You can try this over the specially defensive Jirachi that they try to push on you, the sassy Jirachi. This is much bulkier than that, and it does a lot of the same work. Um, so yeah, this is the Registeel I recommend. I'll put it in moves so you can see. This is not on the Smog decks spread. So okay, now some last punch. What? Um, some last notes about how to think about the game, in my opinion, and think about EVing. Now, I try to focus on one or two Pokemon that I mess with the EVs with when I build a team. The rest I go for default, and then I tweak them if the team clearly has a strength or a weakness. Sometimes you can do more, sometimes you can do less. As a newer player, I wouldn't be too ambitious with the EVing. But when it is time to EV, just look at the sets that are out there, look at the sets in this video, and look at the sets in the Smog decks. Figure out what benchmarks you like, what benchmarks you need, and try and hit those benchmarks, and then use the calc to do that and dump the rest of the points into whatever stat is most useful. Um, there's no magic to it. It can be overwhelming because there's so many numbers and there's so many stats to know about when you're EVing Mons and when you're learning to EV. But with time, I'm hopeful that any new player who wants to learn Gen 3 can learn the different EV spreads and can learn to construct their own EV spreads to make your teams more powerful um, and more customizable for whatever you need them to do. Okay, so thank you for watching. As I alluded to before, in the description, I will have a Pokepaste with all of the sets that I spoke about uh, from my builder, and you can use that and paste them into your builder. And there you go. Okay, thank you for watching.